guests, councillors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding to receive the Mayor's chaplain, the Deputy Mayor, and the Worshipful Mayor of London Borough of Bromley, Councillor Russell L. Miller.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming along this morning to a commemoration service. I want to take a moment to observe a minute of silence with you to remember our dear friend and colleague, Councillor Mary Cook, who sadly passed away on the 7th of January. Councillor Cook was a great public servant for Shortlands and the borough. Mary's commitment to her ward and council was absolute. Her contribution will be sadly missed. Our thoughts are with Mary's family and friends at this time, and our condolences go to them. I would ask you now to join me in a minute's silence. If you kindly stand and bow your heads. Thank you. Would you kindly be seated? Ladies and gentlemen, I bid you a very warm welcome. It is a real honour for me personally to see so many people gathered here this morning. For Holocaust Memorial Day is marked each year on the 27th of January. Today we honour the millions who lost their lives in the Holocaust. We pay tribute to those who survive. We pledge never to forget, but also never to end the fight against the scourge of anti-Semitism. In October last year, I had the great pleasure of meeting Elizabeth Wachowski at the Untitled Polish home in Chislehurst to celebrate her 100th birthday. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Elizabeth here this morning. As a child, Elizabeth lived with her parents in Poland, and in 1939 experienced the Nazi occupation of Poland and the subsequent invasion by Russian military forces. Despite all the horrendous experiences she endured, as you will see today, she is still active, being able to recount the horrors inflicted by both armies upon other people, her own family having been deported to Siberia. Elizabeth has contributed to a book which gives a graphic account of her travails and the efforts of the Polish survivors who, under General Anders, formed a new army to oppose the Germans with notable achievements in the Syrian and in Italian campaigns. Elizabeth trained as a Red Cross nurse and was able to tend to her wounded fellow countrymen. Her account is of primary importance as a person who witnessed the effects of war and will last as a fitting reminder of the inhumanity man can inflict upon his fellow beings. In addition to remembering the millions of victims of the Holocaust and Nazi persecution, Holocaust Memorial Day provides an opportunity to remember the victims of the subsequent genocides in Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda, and Darfur. We are privileged this morning to have such wonderful speakers to help us commemorate this, and I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Rabbi Mendy Bergman, Marilyn Freeman, Caroline Jenner, Dr. Hugh Osgood, Christy Rogers, and my own chaplain, the Reverend Canon Jeremy Blunden. My thanks also to the Reverend Agneta Ayawali for assisting me in arranging this service today. Thank you, Agneta. I leave you through.
I just want to say welcome to all of you today. Thank you for coming to remember the 6 million Jewish people who perished in the Holocaust, and also all those who have suffered in other genocides. I'm so glad that we do this now as a borough, and I'm very grateful to Councillor Kathy Barnes, who pushed very hard, particularly when she was mayor, to make sure that this became an event every year. So thank you, Kathy. I made a friend through a Facebook group, and we both have relatives who lost their lives in the Holocaust. I asked if I could share a post that he wrote last Holocaust Memorial Day. His name is Peter Bergman, and he wrote this: "Today is Holocaust Memorial Day. The scope of this remembrance has been widened to take in all genocides since we as a human race refuse to take note of the lessons of the industrial scale of the killings of the Nazis." I don't want to make this personal, but since the first-hand witnesses of this period are dying off, there are more who dismiss it or refuse to believe it. My grandparents were Jews who lived in Vienna. Their 3 daughters, including my mother, managed to escape to England in 1939. The door then closed. My grandparents were murdered in 1942. Never forget. Peter Bergman also wrote a poem, which I'm going to read to you now. It's called Kristallnacht, November 1938, the night of broken glass. It started then, broken windows, burnt books, the humiliation, the degradation, the beatings, the killings. The world watched. The signs were clear. They did nothing. Nothing. We are better than this. In the coldest, blackest, most dreadful place on earth, children stand over a pile of bricks, hold hands, and sing. The sound permeates the ground, to the ashes, and flies to the sky. Voices that shouldn't be, that defy the concept of victory at an awful cost. We are better than this. The sorrow is dull now. The anger at the futility remains. Millions of lives unfulfilled. Songs not written. Inventions not invented. Laughs not laughed. People defined by their birth and murdered for it. The blind, narrow, awful obscenity of a rancid thought. Words hurt. Words defile. Words degrade and dehumanize. And eventually, words kill. It happened then, and it happened now. We are better than this. Those who see but do nothing, those who shout into buckets in a virtual world and thrive on conflict, the selfish, the malicious, the thoughtless, the bigoted. You are all to blame. We are better than this. The victims of atrocities change. Those responsible are not born evil. They are a failure of the human spirit, an abomination that starts with a cruel word and ends in horror. Blindness to the cruelty of man and man to nature is destroying the beauty so many cannot see. We are running out of time in so many ways, yet are accelerating to disaster. We are better than this. We live in a paradise that is rotting at the edges. The potential for lives well lived and deeds well done is so often derailed and destroyed. Those who saw did nothing. Still stand and shake their heads. It's not their problem, but it is. And next time, they will be the victims. We are better than this. Never forget.
I shall now read from the book of David, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Thank you.
We remember the genocides of Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda, and Darfur, the genocide of the Romani people, and the ongoing persecution of the Rohingya people. If we could please be upstanding for 1 minute silence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Remembering the Holocaust, adapted from a poem by Janet Lees of the Iona community. It snowed again on Auschwitz, a thick white blanket covering 1 million unmarked graves. The familiar train tracks stretch on into the distance. When you go there in person, in the snow and biting wind, and you see the buildings around you, entering each one in turn to be reminded of some further atrocity. Suitcases, glasses, hair, limbs. Even though you know about it, even though you read a book or someone told you, it's a struggle to take it in. When you go there, into the place that was a gas chamber, but now looks like an underground car park, and you listen to the description, or you see the ruined sites that were the other crematoria, blown up so as to conceal the truth, you wonder about life and death, about remembering and forgetting. When you go there and see the rails where the wagons stood, where the people were separated, some for death and some for death later, and you recall the words of prophets and of Christ himself, you know that it is all you can do. You are my witnesses. May our commitment extend beyond this horizon, beyond the memories of a few numbered survivors, as we focus on the living whilst never forgetting the dead.
This is a broadcast from the 25th of January 1995 by Rabbi Hugo Brin, rabbi, broadcaster and survivor. And he says, I'm conscious of a very mixed set of emotions on this eve of marking and commemorating the 50th anniversary of liberation of Auschwitz. I'm glad that 26th and 27th of January are seen as significant dates and that there will continue to be so much media attention given to it. One of the very few sustaining thoughts that I had when I was a prisoner there was one day the world will see what was done there. The systematic, indeed scientific murder of innocent men, women and children in the Birkenau part of Auschwitz to Jews from all parts of Europe who for centuries did their best to cling to an ancient faith, never understood why anyone should want to revile them, raised families, built caring communities, and worked and prayed daily to complete building God's kingdom on earth, and not only to Jews, but to equally innocent gypsies, especially of Germany, Russian POWs, and in nearby Auschwitz I camp, resistance of Nazism throughout occupied Europe. And who did it? Evil men and women who looked so much like ordinary men and women, many of them well-educated. Some had even taken the Hippocratic oath of healing, all of them in elegant uniforms, well-fed, and I imagine devoted to their parents and children, and who, day in and day out, week after week, month after month, stood at the head of selection lines, personally and directly prodded and pushed people into gas chambers, measured and poured cyanide pellets, fueled the crematoria, kept meticulous records, and filed proud reports. And this was my thought. One day, these people who made murder a virtue and the death of innocence a cause for celebration, that they would be exposed and made accountable and brought before some bars of civilized justice. Yes, and be punished for it. There is also a sadness that will not go away. One way or another, there is not a day that without some personal reminder of my brother Gabby, who was 10 when we arrived at Birkenau. And because one of the inmates collecting our baggage kept muttering in Yiddish, "Du bist 18 Jahre alt und du hast ein Fach." You are 18 and you have a trade. At the time we came to the head of the line, aged not yet 14, I lied that I was 19 and a carpenter and joiner, Tischler and Zimmermann. And I was motioned to the right, while Gabby, who said 18, was just laughed at and pushed to the left with our grandparents. And I keep seeing them, and so many aunts and uncles and cousins and friends and neighbours. Indeed, most of the Jewish community of my hometown in Carpathia, slowly, unknowingly, walking to their death. I think of the love and laughter that was extinguished with their lives, and I often wonder how it was and is that I survived, perhaps to give just this kind of testimony. There is a bit of me who would like to be anaesthetised and have all the memory of Auschwitz wiped out, but that cannot be, because so much of what I am was forged there, and so much that could have perished there. My hope tonight is in the next 2 days will be a delayed act of mourning by a world that could not or would not save them, and go some way to remove bigotry, race hatred, and terrorism of every sort out of human experience. I'm going to light the first of the 6 candles to remember the 6th linear.
Now read their memorial prayer, both in Hebrew and in English, followed by 1 minute of silence. Keil Molly Rachamim, Shoichin Mameroimim, Anafim Buchon Choyeno, Anafei Ashachino, the Malmois Kedoshim, Uchtahoirim, Kezoihara Raki Hamazirim, Es Nishmois Achenu B'nei Yisrael, HaKadoshim Batahoirim, שנופלו בדי המצחים, ונשפך דמם באושוויץ, מיידנצ'יק, טרבלינקה, ובשאר מחנויס השמד באירועתו, שהנהרגו ושנשחטו, ושנשרפו, ושנטבעו, ושנחנכו, הקידוש השם, בעפור שכל הקודש, מספלים בעד אסכולת נשמעו יסום, Berganidim Themen Chosom, Lochem Balarachamim, Yastivim, Eseser Kenefach Alelamim, Usroi Bisrachaim Es Nishmosom, Adino Yunach Alosom, Leonuch Besholoim, Almishka Voisom, Beneimar, Amen. A God who is full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant perfect rest in thy divine presence, to all the souls of our holy and pure brethren, whose blood was spilt by the murderers in Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Majdanek, Sobibor, Treblinka, and other extermination camps in Europe, who killed, strangled, burned, and buried alive for the sanctification of thy name. For those for whose souls we now pray, may their resting place be in the Garden of Eden. May the Master of Mercy shelter them in the shadow of his wings for eternity. May he bind their souls in the bond of life. God is their heritage, and may they repose in peace in their resting places. Now let us say, Amen. Amen. Let me take a few moments to say a few words. This morning, where we Holocaust Memorial Day, which is seemingly not a day where we mourn the loss of our loved ones, rather a time to remember the past, preventing it happening again in the future. So today, as we remember the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust, together with other people of mankind who lost their lives to other genocides since then, let us take lesson today how we can change the future. Let me personalize this. My paternal family was shrunk significantly due to the loss of life in the Holocaust. Yet, my father, of blessed memory, was born in Manchester in 1928, more than once shared with me how his parents' house was used as a home for people, survivors of the Holocaust, people sleeping on floors, on couches, until they found a place to live and start life again. This taught me the importance of hospitality, especially in a time of world crisis. Another lesson was brought to me only a few days ago, when I was visiting a friend of mine from school who was sadly mourning the loss of his father at the age of 75, and he shared with me his family history more than once. His grandparents were both Holocaust survivors. One of his grandmother actually escaped Auschwitz. His grandfather was married prior to the Holocaust and lost his wife and I think 1 or 2 children. Despite that, after the Holocaust, after running away to Romania, he remarried and began a new family. And hence, his father was born and his grandchild was there to tell me the story. This taught me the importance to rebuild life after a Holocaust, after so many perished, how we have to work harder to generate life and preserve life. But most importantly, last Friday evening, a book came to my attention with a small anecdote from the diary of Anne Frank, which was a strong word of encouragement and inspiration to myself. Let me share this word with you as one from her last days of her diary, and it reads as follows. As long as this exists, I thought, and I may live to see it, there's sunshine, the cloudless skies, while this lasts, I cannot be unhappy. The best remedy for those who are afraid, lonely, or unhappy is to go outside, somewhere where they can be quite alone with the heavens, nature, and God. Because only then does one feel that all is as it should be, and that God wishes to see people happy, amidst the simple beauty of nature. As long as this exists, and it certainly always will, I know that then there will always be comfort for every sorrow, whatever the circumstances may be, and I firmly believe that nature brings solace in all troubles. End of quote, Anne Frank. So today, when we are facing an emergence of a world pandemic, COVID-19, when despite all the advance of technology and other world sciences, we still face people that are unhappy, let us find happiness in our belief in God, in His creations, His beautiful things of nature, happiness of other human beings by being caring and considerate to them, and to never, God forbid, cause any harm whatsoever to another human being. Thank you for letting me speak today. May we all be blessed.
Deputy Mayor, Madam Mayoress. It's a real privilege for me to take part in this service, although I am one of the national presidents of the Council for Christians and Jews, alongside the Archbishop of Canterbury, Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster, and the Chief Rabbi and others. I am actually a Bromley resident, so being here today means a lot to me. And I don't know whether you're aware, but the theme that's been put forward this year by the Holocaust Memorial Trust is One Day. And they're inviting the participants in what's going to be an online service this evening to reflect on one day. And they've said it can be one day that's in someone's memory, or it can be a day in the past, or it can actually be a day of hope in the future. And in a moment, I want to read something from the scriptures that offers a day of hope. But before I talk about the day of hope, I've discovered something over the last few days that is much more like a day of horror, really. One of the things you get invited to do in my role is to occasionally turn up at unexpected events, and I'm due to be in Winchester on Wednesday for the unveiling of a statue. And I thought I needed to do a little bit of a research into who this statue is all about. And it turned out to be someone called Lauricia of Winchester. And when I was listening to Agneta reading the Kristallnacht story, and it all began, I couldn't help thinking, yes, that began then, but there are beginnings before that beginning. If we were looking at the beginning of hatred, we'd probably need to go back right into the book of Genesis with Cain and Abel. But if we're looking at the roots of anti-Semitism, we can find that in all sorts of situations. I just want to backtrack to 1277 in Winchester, where a prominent Jewish businesswoman, amazing lady, Licoricia is her name. The former Bishop of Winchester said that it actually means sweetmeat, but I was told you can't say licorice all salt because that's not kosher. You learn things on these journeys. But what she did was incredible. At that time, the Jewish community was strong in Winchester in that medieval period. And she became a prominent businesswoman. She actually raised so much money for the king that it was used for the improvement of Westminster Abbey. She raised something that was such a vast sum of money, I'm told it was sufficient to have raised 250 ships for the Navy. But that's the kind of person she was. And then on one spring day in 1277, she was found murdered next to her Christian maid, Alice. And from that point on, within the space of just 13 years from that one death, we ended up with the expulsion of Jews from this country. Shamefully, I believe, paid for by money that the churches gave to the king. You see, some of these things go back a long, long way. And it made me think how just one death led to so much devastation. Now, of course, as a Christian, I've got in my theology a very clear understanding of one death leading to life for many. But I want to read a scripture of hope as we look forward from today. And I'm going to have to go to the very last book of the Bible and almost to the last chapter to find what I want to read to you today. But as well as looking at the horrors, and I'm following on the lead from my rabbi friend that's alongside me, that we need to look for a better future. And one day of hope is something that we can hold in our hearts. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." Days of horror, but also a day of hope.
Invite the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Tony Owen, to read a poem.
The homes are empty and bare. And how did Jews go, I ask? The Jews went quietly, replies the storekeeper. She speaks in a strange, otherworldly voice, as though the sun above our heads had drained her last drop of blood. And in the frozen desolation that surrounds us, her voice sounds still more frozen, more desolate. Once she has gone out with a group to work outside the ghetto, and she has seen, among a group of Jews who were being taken to Panari, an old man and an old woman. Each was carrying a pillow under one arm. They were holding hands like two children, and they were walking so quietly. Never in her life had she seen such quietness. Her eyes had been dim with tears, but yet she noticed that the pillowcases for the old couple's pillows were carefully ironed, fresh and white, although they had just been put on. Why did the old people take along their pillows, I ask? Didn't they know what Panari was? Or did they think they were being transferred to another ghetto? And I feel that the sun high above is waiting with me for the storekeeper's answer. She doesn't know, the woman says, why the old people took their pillows with them. It is possible they didn't know where they were being taken, but perhaps they did. At such moments, very strange thoughts can enter one's mind. Perhaps they had the notion that with the pillows they would lie more softly in their grave. She herself had several times been within a hair's breadth of death. And she knows that at such times wild, extraordinary ideas come into one's head. The storekeeper falls silent. Her eyes rest once again on the sewer grating. She marvels endlessly at the miracle of her survival down there. Then she turns to me and begins to tremble, like the net of spider webs over my mother's doorway. In the ghetto, she says, people used to sing this rhyme. The homes are empty and bare, but in the pits all are there. And she walks slowly away down Jewish Street until she disappears behind piles of rubble. Now those words were written by Chaim Grada, one of the most important Yiddish writers of the 20th century.
Thank you so much to everybody who has taken part in our service today and have shared such powerful and personal testimony. We thank you. And for the rest of us, to hear the story of a witness calls us to be a witness ourselves. What ties us together is that we are, in spite of everything, fellow human beings, sisters and brothers, children of God. What ties us together across the generations, across the nations, is a story of suffering, of resilience, of endurance, a story of hopes and dreams, a story that sometimes takes us to the darkest moments of humanity. It is a story never to be forgotten, to be told and retold until humankind learns and continues to learn all of the lessons from its history. So we give thanks for the courage of those who have carried their story through the decades and across the world. And we pray for all who will, in times to come, continue to speak truth to power and love to hate, showing us that the darkness will never overcome the light. May it be so.
Please be upstanding.
Please be seated.